This is the first part, part A of the Khoodeelaar campaign, world exclusive look at the mainstream London-centric English language national tabloids called Fleet Street. So we diagnose Fleet Street, its contents, and the implication and the likely source or sources for the contents and the editorial orientation. For example, in the Boris graph, which is the one that we call Boris graph because of the heavy sums of money that the title paid Boris Johnson under pretext that he was writing a column. So he was paid millions of pounds over the years, in effect, and the only reason was that they wanted him to be the leader of the Conservatives and the occupant in number 10 Downing Street. Now, today's news that he has been advised to self-isolate for 2 weeks shows that he will be in self-isolation for the entire duration, the remaining duration of the so-called lockdown. Now, this is possible to construe as some skeptics may justifiably conclude that he is doing this as a result of a tactical move in order to avoid being quizzed and questioned about his role and so on. In the days after the kind of news was spread that his fiancée, Kerry Simmons, was a factor in the decision that Boris Johnson made to tell Dominic Cummings to leave with immediate effect. Now, today's Daily Mail is saying that there are claims that Boris Johnson acted so swiftly as he did, according to reports. We are not saying we believe that, but we are saying that that is what the Daily Mail this morning is saying, that he acted as swiftly as he did, reportedly, to tell Dominic Cummings to leave with immediate effect, because there was a very serious pressure on Johnson from Kerry Simmons, or Johnson felt under heavy pressure on account of the fact that Kerry Simmons had been briefed against by Cummings. But today's piece in the Daily Mail says that Johnson said, or reportedly said, that Kerry would go crackers. That is to say, she would be very upset and annoyed and angry if Johnson didn't give the job to Allegra Stratton. Now, this is the point we made days ago. We said that Allegra Stratton was behind the kind of publicity around this whole Cummings row and all the rest of it. The high-octane kind of promotion and propaganda that was taking place around Cummings and Kane leaving had more to do with Allegra Stratton than was being reported. And we have been vindicated by this report in the Mail today. This is not the only report, but there will be others. And also there has been a piece by The Observer, that is the Guardian Observer, where Stratton still has links and connections because she was there working before she left to take a post in the Newsnight slot in the BBC. And the Daily Mail is saying that if she didn't get the job of fronting Johnson's kind of television operation, then Kerry Simmons would be very upset. In the Observer yesterday, the line was that Stratton was the original choice, not the second choice. Previously, weeks earlier, when the first kind of report surfaced about Stratton having been appointed Johnson's television face or face on television, it was claimed that Hrs Latif, who is the main presenter on the BBC television's London news program, was the first preference for Johnson to take their job. But Hrs Latif said that that would be, reportedly, she said that that would be a career suicide for her. So it was Allegra Stratton as the second choice. That was the line. But yesterday's Observer kind of reported without any doubt, as based on Allegra Stratton's statements to them, that Allegra Stratton herself was the original choice, not a second choice. Whether she was the original choice or the second choice is immaterial. The central point is that she has been actively manipulating things in Downing Street, and it appears today in the piece as reported by the Daily Mail that she has been using Kerry Simmons as part of her activities and agenda, her own agenda. Remember that Allegra Stratton was extensively condemned while she was at Newsnight for claiming that poor people in poverty, let's say, or low income, let's say, should not have children, or words to that effect. And she also condemned an employee, ironically, an employee in Tower Hamlets Council, who was claiming benefit because the amount of money she got was too small, too low, and it wasn't enough for her kind of needs, expensive needs. And Allegra Stratton has been already reported as a believer in eugenics. Now, eugenics includes the view that certain people, based on ethnicity, social class, whatever, should be prevented from having children. And that is a kind of serious allegation. And it is seriously kind of unsuitable and at odds with the role that Johnson has now given to her to front Johnson on television kind of briefings and whatever to journalists. The Daily Mail, of course, is continuing the campaign about the distancing and the kind of ban on children touching and seeing their parents if they're ill, or the vice versa, or the parents meeting and seeing their children who are ill and unwell. Now, this is the campaign, the Mail Christmas campaign, and it says that distraught parents have been banned from seeing their children for months under cruel and inhumane care home visiting rules. Families last night pleaded with ministers to allow reunions before Christmas, amid fears that thousands of disabled youngsters are suffering long-term harm. That is the main Daily Mail front page splash. This is a very populist one. And we have to say that this is not the kind of campaign that the Daily Mail kind of runs generally about the absence of accountability by not just the care homes people, but more importantly and centrally, and affecting many more people than this particular ban affects. Not that we are in any way slighting or undermining or underestimating the severe impact this ban has on the parents and the children affected. What we are saying that thousands, millions of people in this country are denied access where they need them, or rights that are kind of necessary for their lives and their well-being and welfare and everything. And that ban and those obstructions and those denials are directly connected with and results of unaccountable decision makers in local councils and the local councils controlled or councils linked care homes. And we get back to the same narrative, which is that all these obstructions and lack of access and lack of say are at odds with and in breach of the UK's international treaty obligations. Remember, that's our narrative, and that is our finding. And the Daily Mail is not mentioning the treaty in this, even in this one, when it has got 2-page spread on pages 6 and 7. Its headline is "So cruel we can't comfort them." That's the parents of disabled children in care homes. Now, if this is cruel, then multiply this cruelty by thousands, hundreds of thousands to apply to other people that are being prevented from contacts with their children or their loved ones or their relatives or their parents, depending on which side of the divide they are kind of kept on. And the other thing, which the Daily Telegraph is running a second editorial today, calling it the planning trap. Now, what it is that they're saying that there are so many empty kind of properties in city centers because of the lockdown and the economic kind of recession de facto, that enough properties exist for those to be converted into homes, flats, which means that directly would remove the need for building new buildings, which is the reason given by Robert Jenrick and the Johnson cabal for overturning or scrapping the current planning regulations. These are fragile, these are not enough by any means, but whatever there is will be completely got rid of under the pretext of having to build more homes. And the Telegraph editorial, the Maurice Graf editorial, acting as Telegraph, is saying that no, it's not necessary. And next to that second editorial is a piece by the highly manipulative and overrated operator called Tim Stanley. Now, Tim Stanley is saying that we have got inundated with too much data on COVID, or on the COVID-19 and the virus. But we don't use the data that we have. That is what he claims. He says instead, most of us in the UK react to the virus and behave hysterically. Now, if that is the case, and it may apply to this description, may apply to a section of the population. If that is the case, then the spark, the trigger for hysteric behavior lies with the irresponsibility and the lying and the lack of honesty by the newspapers, Fleet Street. Because as we have been saying exclusively on this program, the Khoodeelaar campaign, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, We have been saying that the newspapers are not telling the readers and the public the facts about the virus. Although there are kind of hundreds of references to the virus in every edition of the Fleet Street papers, every day, there are hundreds, if not more, reference to the COVID-19 and the virus and the pandemic and the vaccine and all the other things. But they're not talking about the actual kind of activities of the virus, let's say. The various stages of its spread, contacts, and whatever. Because if the newspapers did that, then most people by now would have been able to kind of take action on their own initiative instead of being told to isolate or lock down or whatever. They would have done a lot more individually inspired initiatives based on the information, if that was available and if the information was accurate about the behavior of the virus and the various factors involved in dealing with it. But the newspapers are not telling that. If, let's say, we take March 2020 as the month when the virus kind of surfaced or appeared in a reported way in the UK, then March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, this is 9 months. And from the very beginning of this kind of pandemic reporting, the Boris Graf and other papers, which have given acres and acres of space to the references to the virus, but they have refused or failed to report the actual behavior of this thing. And they have got copy, that is to say, kind of news contents. They subscribe to, for example, all the news agencies. Those who are new to this, I mean, news agencies that dominate the actual business of selling news copy to newspapers around the world are the Associated Press in the USA, Agence France Presse or also AFP, the French news agency AFP, and the international outlet called the Reuters news organization. These are the three top kind of selling and top kind of dominating news distributors, if you like, distributors of the news contents. Whether the contents are correct or not is something we'll talk about in a minute. And they have not been kind of the Boris Graf or the Daily Mail or the other papers, including the Guardian, the Mirror, and the others in Fleet Street, or their counterparts in the regions across England and Britain, United Kingdom. They have not been talking about the actual operation of the thing from A to Z. If they did that, then hysteria, as Tim Stanley claims, would not be necessary, and the people left in ignorance are bound to kind of react emotionally and react in a hysteric way and react illogically. That is what is happening. Now, if the self-isolation report about Johnson is based on the truth that he may have kind of exposed himself to somebody with the virus, then of course it's understandable. But as I said earlier, the skeptics would be evidentially justified to conclude that he is doing a runner to avoid facing the furore or questions about the furore over Dominic Cummings' departure and the role of Kerry Simmons, who has been propelled, groomed, if you like, to use a topical word, or manipulated by Allegra Stratton. So these are the particular details about the so-called Downing Street kind of turmoil, etc. But all of that can be set aside, put aside on one side by saying what we have been saying, that the reason why Cummings had to go and Kane had to go, or The reason why Boris Johnson had to come across as having distancing himself or having distanced himself from the Brexiteers who created him, let's say, because of his lying kind of dedication to the Brexiteers' cause. Because he needs to show to the newly elected US administration, fronted by Joe Biden, that he, Johnson, is not as die-hard as the original Brexiteers, let's say, who didn't want to kind of even think about the impact on Ireland and the impact on the United Kingdom and the importance of Ireland and the kind of Good Friday Agreement operating and continuing to the US administration fronted by Joe Biden, who is of Irish descent, cannot be overemphasized, because not only Biden after this election, but Nancy Pelosi, who is the leader of the Democrats in the US kind of Congress, she had said months ago that the Good Friday Agreement was very important to the Americans. So it was quite clear that the Democrats would support the Good Friday Agreement, which means that they would oppose any Brexit-related kind of abandonment of the Good Friday Agreement or the peace process. And that is why Johnson had to come across as having distanced himself from the Brexiteers. It is too coincidental timing. So our view remains that Johnson may have had kind of local kind of rows between Kerry Simmons and Cummings and his aides to deal with. But that's not the reason why the way that he told Cummings to leave happened. Because Johnson had to come across as being strong and very independent of the influence of Cummings, Kane, and other Brexiteers. That is our position, and this is based on the evidence. Now, here on the front page of the Murdoch Sun, it says Boris Johnson told to self-isolate. Well, they've got a shorter headline, but that is what it says. And the prelude to that headline is that after Prime Minister's COVID battle, well, what they are referring to as COVID battle is not clear in that particular line, but what they're saying is that the turmoil about the exit from Downing Street of Dominic Cummings, etc. And remember, the Sun, the scum, is, along second to the Daily Mail, is the main kind of platform for Brexiteers. And the scum is also the platform for hatred, racist hatred and racism and corrupt kind of plotting to demonize Corbyn. Because the scum doesn't want a Labour administration. That is the essential line. They don't want a Labour Party government in this country. So the line here is that Johnson has been asked to self-isolate. And they are claiming here, the Kate Ferguson piece, that Johnson nearly died after catching the coronavirus earlier this year. This test and trace, NHS test and trace told him yesterday he must self-isolate for 10 days. Now, this is 10 days, and the other one in the Daily Mail, I think, is saying, or elsewhere, let's say in Fleet Street, saying that he has been asked to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So there's a difference of 4 days. Last night, Johnson said he had no symptoms and would work from number 10. He added he was bursting with antibodies and felt better than ever. This is the kind of language that Trump used, and we shall put that aside as a typical kind of boast, because there is no way that he can say that definitively. And this is the page 2 detail of that boast. Page 2 on the Murdoch scum. He's saying in that boast that he is bursting with antibodies and fitter than ever. And there's another piece in the same page, on the same page of the scum, saying, and they're talking about the row between, alleged row between Kerry Simmons and Dominic Cummings. And they're running a 2-page spread on the pop kind of world. And they make a point about this Muhammad Farah, who calls himself Mo in order to hide his Muslim kind of name. And there are lots of stuff about the pop world. And there is a cartoon about Cummings' departure. And in the piece written by the poisonous Trevor Kavanagh, the headline is, "Everything's come apart, Boris, get a grip." And he's talking about the agenda that Boris Johnson should follow. It's a completely Brexiteering agenda that Kavanagh is reiterating for Boris Johnson. And there are 2 pages on Des O'Connor. It's a kind of tribute they're paying to Des O'Connor, who died a few days ago. And they're saying that Keir Starmer has disclosed that he once lived above a massage parlor. Now, describing him as a millionaire, Keir Starmer. And similar rubbish in the Murdoch scum, which raises the question that we put in response to Tim Stacey's kind of piece on the Telegraph about the hysteric reaction. Team Stanley, not Stacey's, Team Stanley on the Boris graph, saying that we have got too much data, but we behaved or we behave hysterically. And the reason is because there is no evidence-based, fact-based coverage of the pandemic. And what this lack of fact-based addressing, evidence-based addressing of the crisis shows and has shown is that not only is the health service, which should be fit for purpose, is not fit for purpose, but also the rest of the kind of state logistics, the installations of the state are also kind of unfit for purpose. Unfit for purpose of meeting the needs in a democratic society. And the reason is that there is no democracy. As Johnson has repeatedly shown and is showing in his legislation program, and what Trevor Kavanagh, the voice of Rupert Murdoch, is telling him to do, is to abandon whatever kind of international obligations, treaties, and other duties to a civil democratic society are owed by the state. Because Brexit, quite apart from the fact that it means or it refers to or signals the departure of the UK as a member of the EU, the implication of Brexit are not about leaving the EU or a club or an organization. The implications are against the people's civil liberties, democratic liberties, and people's kind of entitlement to social protection, if you like. That includes recognizing society, which the Tories don't recognize. Which is why all these claims of lack of funds that the Tories are bleating about or making claims about, these are lies, because they are spending billions under the emergency kind of fundraising or kind of national debt causing kind of adventures, because they are incurring national debt for the country, but the borrowings they are making are going into the pockets. The fruits of the borrowings are going into the pockets of big business and big contractors. And there is no connection, there is no correlation between these various different kind of factors in the coverage of the Fleet Street papers, which is why we call them cover-ups. Even the Guardian is not referring to the billions of pounds being stolen by people who have only donated, let's say, a few £1,000s to the Conservatives. But in return for those few £1,000s, these big business crooks are being given the benefit of billions of pounds of public money. Now, if you add together the amounts of money spent in helping people in poverty and low income over the last 50 years, I'm not talking about just 1 year, 2 years, 50 years, you'd find that even that amount of money spent to help the kind of people in low income and poverty is smaller, is less than the money they have spent in the last 10 years in funding big business criminals by robbing the public of hundreds of billions of pounds in the last 10 years. Think about that. So the poverty in this country is completely unnecessary. That is to say, it's not inevitable as a result of the because of the lack of financial abilities on the part of the state. It is because the state has been controlled by crooks and criminals who have exposed the resources available under various schemes, including the current one for the last, say, 10 months or 9 months of the pandemic emergency. This has been exposed to the crooks who are looting the state and the public and kind of condemning the general treasury to decades of indebtedness to the various sources from whom the debts are being procured, if you like. And instead of talking about those issues, Keir Starmer has been talking about having lived above a massage parlor once. I mean, how unfit an opposition leader can that be? Because he's ignoring all the major kind of issues. Both the fact that the administration in the USA signals it is a different thing from actually carrying out the anti-Brexit narrative to the full, but signals an anti-Brexit stance by the new administration. And instead of accepting the categorization that opposing Brexit is betraying England, the narrative should be that Brexit is against England's interests. And Brexit is against the rights of the majority of the indigenous people, the white people, let's say. And that it is against the main economic and social interests of the vast majority of people in England, in Britain. And what happened in the referendum, the 52 and 48% difference, happened because of the lies the gullibles were told. And the gullibles, we call them gullibles because of the fact that they are too willing too often to buy the lies and then repent afterwards, which is too late. The biggest lie, or one of the biggest lies that Boris Johnson fronted, was the lie that the Turks would take over England if Britain didn't leave the EU. And as we have said, there is no record, there is no evidence of the Turks even applying for membership of the kind of European Union. The application would not be acceptable to almost all the members of the Western European countries who have a hostility to Turkey because it's a mainly Muslim country. That is the current position. The historical position is because of the near kind of real occupation of parts of Western European countries by the Turks in the past. And that is not even to begin to discuss what happened in Spain. The genocide of Muslims in Spain by the Christians and the kind of impact of the genocides are still raging. It's hardly mentioned because to mention those genocides and massacres of Muslims would raise the question of the claim by the Western European countries of being civilized and liberal and tolerant. So Boris Johnson used one of the worst kind of anti-Muslim and hateful kind of incitements to scare the gullibles into voting for the Brexit. And that was a narrow vote. And that narrow vote, even that narrow vote was actually achieved by Boris Johnson-fronted cabal of liars and haters that told lies to the gullibles. Now, the economic scenario is being mispainted, misreported by the Daily Express and other die-hard Brexiteers every day. But the reality is that if on the one hand, the virus doesn't kind of get effectively controlled to a point of kind of non-stoppage, if you like, of the economy, where the economy can resume or the people can resume working in the normal or near normal kind of way. If the virus and the pandemic and the COVID-19 continues, then that would be something that the Brexiteers had not kind of calculated when they made the bogus claims that UK would have a global economic power as a result of the unshackling, as they put it, of Britain from the shackles of the European Union. And the rest of the Western European countries would be suffering as well because of the pandemic and the attendant directly resulting from the virus, attendant crisis. So the future is not just able to be resolved by Johnson or whoever is in kind of post as the incumbent government by staging stunts, because you can't create Downing Street turmoil of the type that they created in the last week. You cannot create it every so often. In fact, it cannot create it again for another few years. So there has to be evidence of genuine ability and capacity and fitness for delivering all the many urgent emergency needs that millions of people are deprived of and are entitled to receive. So this is a crisis point here. And this is the thing that we just talked about, the budget. The billions of pounds being kind of wasted or stolen and robbed. Now, Times says that road users will be charged extra funds, extra kind of tax to fill the 40 billion pound budget hole. That's what they're saying on the Times. So it is happening already. And so there is a picture of dogs in at Herne Bay in Kent yesterday on the snow. We shall be looking at that in a minute. And again, there is this contradiction and lying. Because the Times says that Johnson has already told aides that Kane would come back to government. So that lie apart, let's look at the two-page spread headlined Quarter of Hospitals and Hotspots Restricting Routine Operations. And that is the evidence of what he said, not fit for delivering the health service needed in an emergency. And that actually opens up the other problems in the so-called National Health Service, which has not been kept in fit health for 70 years. It has been always attacked and depleted and fleeced by consultants and other lobbies. And NHS staff are flocking to anti-vaccination groups, according to this report. And there are other kind of topics that refer to the vaccine, refer to the kind of virus and the pandemic, but they don't talk about the actual details of what it does and how it spreads and what are the stages. The only thing that is in the papers today is that long-term kind of sufferers of the COVID or COVID sufferers suffer long-term organ kind of defects as a result of that. And there is a piece on the Times, page 18, Jonathan Amis, who is described as legal editor. And the headline is, Supreme Court reforms by Boris Johnson are cheap revenge. And revenge refers to the role played by the Supreme Court in making rulings against some of the Brexiteering adventures. Now, as we have said before, and as we are saying, even despite this piece by the legal editor of the Times, that the role played by the Supreme Court and the kind of any other court in the High Court, allegedly kind of halting the dictatorial and unconstitutional behavior by Johnson, or before that, even by Theresa May. These were kind of tokenistic, not really tough, and that never kind of told the full or most of the truth that they knew they could have told, but they decided, the judges, the judiciary being dishonest and opportunistic and careerist, decided not to go that far, which they should have done. And the reason why the Supreme Court didn't go that far is not accidental. That is part of the whole myth about the separation of powers and the kind of judiciary being independent. Because the judicial careerists that make the decisions about the direction of the role of the judiciary in the state, they careeristically, opportunistically kind of abuse their positions as they suppress the duties owed to the public by the judicial system. So the judicial system remains another country, completely locked away, in permanent locked out. Public are locked out permanently from access to the actual kind of remedies that should be available by use of the courts in this country. So, what is happening in the reform, so called, is that they are not really reforming the Supreme Court or the court system or the court bureaucracy in order to give the ordinary people, the gullibles, any more access or rights than the gullibles already are kind of able to assert, which is zero. The legal bureaucracy is dominated by licensed law traders. And it's, as I said, another country. The legal bureaucracy, when represented by or when kind of measured by the behavior of the judges in various posts across it, is a separate country, miles, millions of miles away from this ordinary people's lives. And there is this built-in and kind of mushrooming obstruction in the court system that the corrupt bureaucracies continue to perpetuate. And that is the addition of new barriers under the guises of civil procedure rules or practice directions, etc. Because they have got like their kind of millions of pages, millions of words, and there is nothing about the role of the judiciary, role in delivering remedies, and there is no concept of justice for the ordinary people. And the people who are not wealthy enough to fund the access to the function of the judicial bureaucracy, which is like a corrupt center, corrupt instrument that can be bought, instrument in the form of rulings, either way, that can be bought by only the most wealthy. And that is where David Neuberger's boast to the Evening Standard in January 2017 comes in. Because Neuberger said that once Brexit is done, London, he didn't say UK or Britain or England, he said London, he meant the concentration of the high courts, including the Supreme Court. London would attract legal business from all over the world. What Neuberger was saying was that the court's bureaucracy was a brothel that could be bought by the highest bidders, all the criminals with the highest amounts of money at their disposal to take action through the brothel of a legal kind of system to beat their opponents or to evade their responsibilities in their own countries back home. But this would be the place, it's like the offshore location of the world's brothel set law. That is what the courts in England have become and been turned into. And Neuberger was boasting about that, which historically kind of brings back into the frame of references what Napoleon Bonaparte said about the English, nation of shopkeepers, a nation that is prepared to sell whatever buys the money. And the legal bureaucracy is completely corrupt to the point that Neuberger, within days of his retirement as the first president of the Supreme Court, which was a confection itself, was boasting that London would become the center of the law trade based on the wealth of the most wealthy and the most crooked and the corrupt in the world. What did Neuberger say? Neuberger said in his piece, so it was posted on the Evening Standard. Well, it's a Evening No Standard website by Martin Bentham on Tuesday, the 4th of July, 2017 at 9:51 in the morning, that Brexit could boost London's status as world's legal center. Britain's top judge says. There's a big picture of Neuberger underneath it. And it reads, the country's most senior judge has declared that Brexit could boost London's status as the world's legal center by allowing the courts to respond more swiftly to emerging worldwide issues. What rubbish! Because there were no forum anywhere that were dealing with emerging worldwide issues. No courts, that is. And that includes the international courts based in Europe, in Switzerland or other places, or the court that has been set up by the Council of Europe, which is completely different from the European Union. Lord Neuberger, the president of the Supreme Court, said that once British judges were left to our own common law devices, that is the quote, those words, left to our common law devices, they would, again starting quotation, be able to react more quickly and freely to developments in our fast-changing world. What developments was Neuberger possibly referring to? Because that is a banal statement, fast-changing world. It could be said about any time, any moment in the world. He also insisted that Britain's departure from the EU could in no way undermine London's status as the world center for legal services generally, and dispute resolution in particular, and was instead acting as a spur to further improvements. These are words that could have only been confected by a madam in a kind of brothel of laws, because there is no evidence, absolutely no evidence, based on the behavior of the courts in London over the last 300, 400 years, that London was ever available to the ordinary public anywhere, either in England, in Britain, or in any other country. Ordinary people of any other country, that is, to use these courts to seek justice and get justice. Because, as we say, the structure, the kind of frame and the foundation and the kind of location of the bureaucracy, legal bureaucracies, are devised and kind of accumulated and perpetuated by forces and by considerations, by agendas to deprive ordinary people of justice. And the fact that Neuberger could use these kind of grand phrases should be entirely linked to the period of England as the imperial force at the expense of the local countries in Africa and Asia. Look at this. None of the independence struggles against Britain was facilitated by any of the courts. So the courts are irrelevant. Not only irrelevant, but they were part of the oppressor, part of the colonizer, the colonialist forces. And the disputes that are happening across the continents of Africa and Asia, let's say, let's not talk about the southern American states where there is a lot of ongoing conflicts and battles going on and violations of civil liberties and imprisonment of innocent people and the revenge attacks by the regimes on dissidents and whatever. Let's talk about the many countries across Africa where millions of people are denied ordinary civil liberties, ordinary freedom of speech, ordinary right to criticize the regime concerned in their country. That is Africa and Asia. There is not a single example of any of those kind of acts of suppression and denial and violation of human rights being correctly sorted by the intervention of the London courts. None whatsoever. And of course, that is a general statement even before we refer to the goings on in northeastern China, where the Uyghurs are being held in concentration camps, in detention camps, and all the other things. And literally hundreds of thousands of rapes that are allowed to take place in the Asian continent, subcontinent, let's say, subcontinent of Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, and neighboring adjoining countries. Hundreds of thousands of rapes take place, and there is no remedy, there is no justice for the victims of rape. And similarly, other violations based on faith, based on gender, are taking place, and there is nothing going on in the London courts about any of that. So where on earth did Neuberger get this stupid idea to boast about Brexit delivering anything like what he said to Martin Bentham, or what he said as reported by Martin Bentham on the 4th of July 2017? And if we return to the borders of England, if you like, the English gullibles have no remedies to their problems given by the courts. And it's not unconnected, and it's not kind of removed from the attitude, the ideas and the ideologies believed in by the likes of those who make the decisions about who would be prosecuted and who would be given the support of the prosecution system to uphold or assert their rights, human rights and whatever. The likes of the person who calls himself or herself the Director of Public Prosecution. For his entire tenure as the Director of Public Prosecution, Keir Starmer failed to uphold the rights of the victims of robberies, theft, violations, and abuse of power by the particular offenders, particular kind of organizations, particular councils, government departments, especially government departments of the type typified by the Department for Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation. That is to say, the UK DWP. Thousands of people were pushed to commit suicide, mass suicide. So, for example, in the case of the benefit sanctions, let's say, so one report this year on 7th of February 2020 by The Guardian says, this year, that is 2020, at least 69 suicides linked to DWP handling of benefit claims, which means that they pushed these people, 69 people at least, to commit suicide, which is a massacre by the DWP, because they pushed those people to commit suicide after those people, every one of them, told them that they were in grave danger because of the poverty and the starvation they are being pushed into. And the DWP continued to deprive them, deny them money that they were absolutely entitled to and they were absolutely in need of. And it says, Watchdog warns true number of cases where claimants took own lives as a result of DWP actions could be far higher. Of course they could be. And they are. And this is the report that is dated the 7th of February this year. But there are other reports from previous years. And we shall go to those, some of those. Okay, look at this. It says that DWP ignored coroner's call to take action to save claimants. That is 16th of July this year. And another one, that is also in the Guardian website, on the Guardian website. And the other one, 16th of July, on the 27th of February, 2020, is on the disabilityrightsuk.org website. So disability rights UK, that is all one word, disabilityrightsuk.org, all one word. That is the piece headed by DWP destroyed reports into claimants who committed suicide. So what on earth was Neuberger kind of boasting about London being the center of the legal dispute resolution? What dispute could any court resolve? There were mass suicide being caused by the English department for want and poverty creation. And there it didn't get any justice, any remedy. And they couldn't go there either because there are so many obstructions and barriers put in the way of people seeking remedies through the court system that it was not considered worth trying, because people would be given extra grief, additional stress and frustration by the court system. And what has happened is that when the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, he issued a number of kind of dictats as to how the Crown Prosecution Service should treat claimants for DWP benefits, claimants in poverty, etc., who were so desperate that they were allegedly kind of making up stories of poverty and so on in order to get the money. Now, given the whole attitude, the culture of the DWP obstructing people from getting badly needed, very urgently needed support, the basic human needs to have basic survival kind of is undeniable. But Keir Starmer treated those people as like serious criminals. And he then passed a kind of number of orders as to how the Crown Prosecution Service should deal with those kind of claimants in the future. And he treated them as really serious kind of criminals against society. They were not. So this is the reality of the access to court. The access to court would be as criminals, offenders, as being accused of stealing from the state. That is the role of the courts, as created an extra aggravating role created by Keir Starmer shortly after he left the job as the Director of Public Prosecutions. That he did in 2013. And not long after that, he landed the job or the opportunity to become the MP for Holborn and St. Pancras in central London, in the borough of Camden. And from there, he, of course, got into the front bench, and he's now the leader of the Labour Party. With a person with that kind of attitude, what could be expected from him to do to deliver or support the delivery of justice and much needed help to the most vulnerable, the most poorest, and the most in need of support? There couldn't be anything. And so therefore, when the supporters and the bots operating allegedly in the name of a campaign to restore Jeremy Corbyn to his whatever position they think he should be restored to, they never ever paid attention to Keir Starmer's very conservative, very cruel, and very kind of lacking in compassion personality and record. Because if they had done that, then he would have been undermined and he would not be the leader of the Labour Party. And the reason why they didn't do that is because they are not very intelligent. And the entirety of the left in this country, is represented by mediocrity, lack of intelligence, and therefore they are unfit as competent critics of the real enemies of society, which get daily coverage and peddling by the Fleet Street papers and the mainstream papers. I mean, Keir Starmer was given a spot on the desert island disc this week, precisely because he is in tune with the agenda being promoted by the mainstream, the BBC, the Fleet Street, and so on. And these forces are keeping the people down and denying people the rights. And Neuberger and them belong in the same kind of league, the same bracket. And they deny and deprive people and lie to people and lie about the opportunities that are available to the deprived and the disadvantaged. Now, there is a piece in one of the papers today saying that youngsters from poor background, deprived backgrounds, would be treated leniently by universities when it comes to entrance. Fine. So a few hundred more would get in, or even a few thousand more would get in. What that kind of headline and that kind of promotion hides is the truth and the reality about the agenda of the education or the university curriculum. What are they? What ideology are they promoting? And what evidence is there that even if they got into those courses, that the inherent inequality or injustice that obstructs millions of people in the wider society would be removed. So it's a patronizing and a matronizing kind of headline and an initiative. Patronizing and matronizing children from the particularly kind of low income and poverty stricken, so-called disadvantaged backgrounds and families. All the societies, big kind of problems and all the factors that cause this disadvantage and denial are left unaddressed and are denied the existence of by the very people who are giving them this so-called extra concession. The narrative in the so-called education in the university curriculum, the narrative is unaltered. It's a racist narrative, it's an imperialist narrative, and in the case of the internal domestic kind of relationship and equation I'm using in a mathematical sense, not in a social sense. These are unaltered, and there is no question raised about the causes of poverty, causes of disadvantage, causes of discrimination, and they are not ever examined by looking at the role of the court bureaucracies that are dishonest, they are lying, and they are racist. In the case of a series of applications made to the High Court over the last 8 years, let's say, all the applications have been thoroughly, truthfully fact-based. But instead of allowing the applications to go ahead, the personnel in the High Court particular offices have in effect blocked them. Now, no number of licensed law traders could, even if they actually, truthfully, honestly were dedicated to finding the facts or evidence, could add to the evidence. It is such an impeccable series of evidence and facts and truth. So when the kind of people behind the scene, as it were, kind of the people employed in the courts as administration personnel. They are not judges, and they're not necessarily, in fact, most of them are not qualified either by study or by license to behave as lawyers. And yet, they make decisions that routinely and regularly block highly lawful and legally valid claims. Now that is the evidence, that is the truth. So what was David Neuberger boasting about, as reported by Martin Bentham on the website of the Evening Standard, dated the 4th of July, 2017? Because none of these people that have been blocked and are regularly blocked by the faceless personnel in the positions in the High Court is held accountable, and there is no remedy. So it's a kind of permanent barrier against people in Britain having any access to the courts. So Neuberger was not only not giving the facts, he was in fact being negligent and was perpetuating this lie. And the lie is retold by the Evening's Standard. Because he said Brexit could boost London's status. What status could that be? As world's legal center. It's not even the legal center for the people of England, let alone the world's. And none of these lies are being even, if you like, noted as being lies or as being perpetrated by the Fleet Street papers. So when we say that this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, that is the kind of evidence that we bring to this diagnosis. And Martin Bentham says that Neuberger made those comments that Bentham reported on 4th of July while Neuberger was speaking. Neuberger was speaking to Australian lawyers. And Bentham also gives him additional credit, and I'll come to that in a second. And Bentham says of Neuberger, within quotes, Brexit does not alter the fact that lawyers and judges in the UK are as internationally minded and expert as they ever have been. Now, that is a complete lie. The lawyers and judges are not anything like internationally minded when it comes to recognizing the international and kind of frameworks of the treaties, conventions, etc. And when it comes to the founding aims of the United Nations, when it comes to the Treaty of Rome, the Human Rights Convention. In fact, the judges And lawyers hardly, if ever, make any references in their kind of pleadings and their professional so-called licensed behavior to any of those frameworks, treaties, obligations. And there is this other idiotic, banal statement. Brexit is operating as a spark to encourage all involved in the provision of legal services in London to strive to ensure that those services are even better than they already are. What is the services? What on earth is Neuberger referring to as services? Legal services do not exist. Legal services do not exist for 99% of the people that have to kind of take any action by the courts or are being affected by the violations of their rights via the courts. And we shall be diagnosing this further.